Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Frank Delacroix stood at attention in his dress uniform one last time, watching the flag fold with military precision. 25 years in Army intelligence, followed by 15 years in private security consulting. 40 years of service to country and family. And now, they were handing him a gold watch and a pension. The retirement ceremony took place in the base's oak-paneled hall, filled with colleagues, subordinates, and what he'd thought was his loving family. Rita, his wife of 22 years, sat in the front row wearing the diamond necklace he'd bought her for their anniversary. Their son Trevor, 21 and fresh out of college, checked his phone constantly. Their daughter Madison, 19, seemed more interested in her Instagram than her father's final military moment. Frank had built everything for them. The sprawling house in the suburbs, private school educations, Rita's wellness center that she'd opened 3 years ago. He'd sacrificed deployments, missed birthdays, endured the loneliness of military life, all so they could live comfortably. But Frank Delacroix hadn't survived psychological operations in 3 different theaters by being naive. For the past 6 months, he'd known exactly what Rita was doing. The discovery had been accidental. A text message that popped up on her iPad while she was in the shower, left carelessly on their kitchen counter. Can't wait to be free of the old soldier. Tonight was amazing. B. Boyd Hutchins, Rita's yoga instructor turned business partner. 12 years younger than Frank. All smooth charm and calculated manipulation. Frank had conducted surveillance operations on enemy combatants with less thoroughness than he'd applied to uncovering his wife's affair. He'd installed software on her devices, placed GPS trackers, even rented apartments across from Boyd's loft to photograph their encounters. Rita thought she was clever, but she was an amateur playing against a professional who'd spent decades in intelligence gathering. The affair had been going on for 8 months, but the real betrayal went deeper. Through financial records and intercepted communications, Frank had discovered Rita and Boyd's ultimate plan. Divorce him immediately after retirement, take half his assets, and use his pension to fund their new life together. They'd even involved the children. Trevor had been promised Frank's vintage car collection if he supported the divorce. Madison had been told she could redecorate the house however she wanted once Frank was gone. As the ceremony concluded and people began mingling, Frank felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every major operation in his military career. Everything was about to change, but he was ready. Rita approached with that smile he'd once found beautiful, now seeing it for what it was, a weapon. "Honey, we need to talk privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Frank nodded. "Of course." Chapter 2, The Betrayal. The side room was small and windowless, typically used for private briefings. Rita had chosen it well, isolated, soundproof. Trevor and Madison followed them in, both wearing expressions Frank had never seen before. Cold, calculating, strangers wearing his children's faces. "Frank," Rita began, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard. Confident, almost predatory. "We need to discuss your retirement plans." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick manila envelope. "These are divorce papers. I'm filing immediately." "And these," she produced another envelope, "are foreclosure documents on the house." Frank remained perfectly still, his expression neutral. Years of interrogation training had taught him to reveal nothing. "The house is underwater on the mortgage," Rita continued, her voice gaining strength. "My business partner Boyd has found some irregularities in your finances. Tax liens, unpaid debts you've been hiding from me. The house has to go." Trevor laughed, a sound that cut through Frank like shrapnel. "Should have seen this coming, old man. Mom's been planning this for months. You think we didn't know about your secret bank accounts? Your gambling debts?" Frank's eyes narrowed slightly. Gambling debts? There were no gambling debts. But he said nothing. Madison chimed in with vicious satisfaction. 40 years for nothing. Boyd showed us everything. You've been lying to us our whole lives about money." Rita leaned forward, Her mask completely dropped now. "We're taking the house, and you get nothing. Boyd and I are starting fresh, and the kids support us completely. You can keep your precious military pension. It's barely enough to rent an apartment anyway." She slid the papers across the small table. "Sign them. Make this easy on everyone." Frank looked down at the documents. The divorce papers were standard, but the foreclosure documents were interesting. According to these papers, the house had been refinanced multiple times, with loans taken out in his name that he'd never authorized. Debts to companies he'd never heard of. Financial obligations that painted him as either a compulsive gambler or a man living far beyond his means. This wasn't just adultery and greed. This was fraud. Rita and Boyd had forged his signature on loan documents, created false financial records, and built a case to make him look financially irresponsible. They weren't just stealing his life, they were destroying his reputation. Frank picked up the pen Rita offered. "Okay," he said simply. The words seemed to deflate some of Rita's anticipated drama. She'd clearly expected begging, anger, threats. Instead, Frank began signing documents with the same methodical precision he'd once used to sign operation orders. "That's it?" Trevor asked, sounding almost disappointed. "No fight? No pleading?" Frank looked up at his son. No, at the young man who'd helped plan his destruction. What would be the point? He signed the last document and stood. "I'll pack a bag and be gone within the hour." As he reached the door, Rita called out, "Frank, your pension checks will be direct deposited to the joint account until the divorce is finalized. We'll need that money to cover the house payments until we can sell." Frank paused, but didn't turn around. Of course. Chapter 3, The Departure. Frank's packing was efficient and deliberate. One military duffel bag containing clothes, his medals, a few personal items, and one particular file folder he'd been preparing for months. He moved through the house he'd paid for, past the furniture he'd bought, under the roof he'd provided, feeling like a ghost in his own life. Rita and Boyd were in the kitchen, sharing a bottle of champagne and speaking in hushed, excited tones about their plans. Trevor was on the couch, already looking through car magazines, planning how to sell Frank's restored 1967 Mustang. Madison was upstairs, probably planning her room renovation. None of them looked up as Frank walked out the front door for the last time. He drove to a hotel across town, checked in under a false name he'd established months ago, and opened his laptop. The real Frank Delacroix, the one who'd spent 25 years in psychological operations, was finally going to work. Rita thought she'd discovered his secret finances. In reality, she'd found exactly what he'd wanted her to find. Fake accounts, fabricated debts, false records he'd created specifically to support her narrative. She thought she was playing him, but she'd been playing into his hand from the moment she'd decided to betray him. Frank opened his encrypted files and began making phone calls. The first was to his lawyer, not the family attorney Rita knew about, but a specialist in criminal defense who'd been briefed on Frank's situation months ago. The second call was to a private investigator who'd been documenting every illegal transaction Rita and Boyd had made using Frank's forged signature. The third call was to a former military colleague who now worked in federal banking investigation. By the time Frank closed his laptop 2 hours later, several investigations were about to begin. Rita and Boyd had committed multiple federal crimes: identity theft, bank fraud, mortgage fraud, and forgery. They'd used Frank's military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on documents, and created a paper trail that would destroy them both. But that was just the beginning. Frank's real plan was far more sophisticated than simple criminal prosecution. He'd spent 6 months creating a web of financial instruments, shell companies, and legal structures that would systematically dismantle everything Rita and Boyd thought they'd stolen. The house they believed they were taking? Frank had quietly restructured the mortgage through a company he controlled. They'd be making payments to him, unknowingly, while he collected evidence of their fraud. Boyd's assets? Frank had invested in the companies Boyd owed money to, gaining enough influence to call in debts at the worst possible moment. Rita's wellness center? Frank had discovered Boyd had been embezzling from it to fund their affair. When that information became public, along with evidence of the forged loans, both their personal and professional reputations would be destroyed. But Frank wasn't finished. He'd learned that Boyd had done this before, seduced wealthy women, manipulated them into financial fraud, then disappeared when the heat got too intense. There were 3 other victims in different states, women who'd lost their homes and savings to Boyd's schemes. Frank had contacted them all. They were very interested in testifying against Boyd and Rita as co-conspirators. As Frank lay on the hotel bed that night, he thought about the phone calls that would start coming soon. Rita would realize she'd walked into a trap. Boyd would discover his carefully constructed new identity was crumbling. Trevor and Madison would learn that their inheritance was funded by crimes they'd helped enable. But Frank Delacroix had learned something in 40 years of service. Patience was the most devastating weapon of all. Chapter 4. The First Tremor. 1 week after Frank's departure, the first cracks began to show. Rita stood in the kitchen of her newly acquired home, staring at a certified letter from Morrison & Associates, a law firm she'd never heard of. The letter was addressed to Frank, but since he'd signed power of attorney over to her, another document she believed she'd cleverly manipulated him into signing, she opened it. Dear Mr. Delacroix, our client, Pinnacle Financial Services, has requested immediate payment of the outstanding balance on account hashtag 4471-89X. Per the terms of your agreement dated March 15th, failure to maintain required payments triggers a full acceleration clause. The entire principal amount of $347,000 is now due within 30 days. Rita's hands shook. $347,000? She'd never heard of Pinnacle Financial Services, and March 15th was during the time she thought Frank was falling for her tricks. She called Boyd immediately. We have a problem. Boyd arrived within an hour, his usual confident swagger replaced by nervous energy. What kind of problem? Rita showed him the letter. Boyd's face went pale as he read. This doesn't make sense, he said. We traced all of Frank's accounts. There was no loan this big. Unless he was hiding more than we thought, Rita said, her voice rising. Maybe the gambling debts were real. Maybe. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed the number for Sunrise Bank, where they'd applied for the mortgage transfer on the house. Mrs. Delacroix, this is Janet Harrison from Sunrise Bank. We need to discuss some irregularities in your mortgage application. Rita's stomach dropped. What kind of irregularities? The documentation you provided appears to have been altered. We're going to need to verify all signatures with your husband present. Can you have him come in this week? Rita hung up and immediately dialed Frank's number. It went straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, across town, Trevor was experiencing his own crisis. He'd gone to the DMV to transfer ownership of Frank's Mustang, only to discover the car was registered to a company called Delacroix Holdings, not to Frank personally. The clerk informed him that he'd need corporate authorization to transfer the title. But it's my father's car, Trevor protested. According to our records, sir, this vehicle is corporate property. You'll need to contact the company's legal department. Trevor called the number provided, reaching an automated system that eventually connected him to a law office. The attorney who answered was polite but firm. I'm sorry, but Mr. Delacroix specifically instructed us that no family members are authorized to access corporate assets without his written permission. Where is my father? Trevor demanded. I'm not authorized to provide that information. Madison was facing her own problems. She'd attempted to use one of Frank's credit cards to buy new furniture, only to discover the account had been frozen. When she called the credit card company, they informed her that the account holder had reported potential fraud and requested a security hold on all transactions. By evening, the 3 conspirators were gathered in Rita's kitchen, each bringing their own piece of bad news. It's like he knew, Rita said, pacing. Like he planned this. Boyd shook his head. That's impossible. Frank's a simple soldier. He doesn't have the sophistication to set up something this complex. Then explain this. Rita slammed down another letter that had arrived that afternoon. It was from the IRS, requesting documentation for unreported income in Boyd's name. Income that appeared to be connected to Rita's business. Boyd stared at the letter. I never received unreported income from your business. I know that, and you know that, but someone's been reporting payments to you. Large payments. For the past 6 months. Trevor looked up from his phone. Guys, We have bigger problems. I just got a call from my bank. They're freezing my accounts, pending an investigation into suspicious deposits. What suspicious deposits? Rita asked. Apparently, someone's been depositing money into my account from offshore companies. Money I never received, but the paper trail says I did. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Frank hadn't just discovered their plan. He'd been building a counterplan. Every move they'd made, every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, had been anticipated. Rita's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your email. She opened her laptop and found a message with no text, just a video attachment. When she clicked play, she saw herself and Boyd in his apartment, discussing their plans to frame Frank for gambling debts. The timestamp showed it was from 3 months ago. Another message arrived. This is just the beginning. Boyd stood up abruptly. I'm leaving town. Tonight. You can't leave, Rita said desperately. We're in this together. No, Boyd said, backing toward the door. You're in this. I was never married to him. I can disappear. But as Boyd reached for the door handle, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his mother's number from Arizona. Boyd, honey, are you in some kind of trouble? 2 men in suits came by asking about you. They said they were federal agents. Boyd's face went white. He looked at Rita, then at Trevor and Madison. He's not just coming for us, Boyd whispered. He's destroying everything we ever touched. Chapter 5. The Tightening Noose. Frank sat in his hotel room, monitoring multiple computer screens showing bank accounts, legal documents, and surveillance footage. 3 weeks had passed since he'd signed the papers, and his trap was working perfectly. Rita had made 7 desperate calls to his phone, each more frantic than the last. Boyd had attempted to flee the state, only to be stopped at the airport by federal agents investigating the fraudulent loans. Trevor and Madison had both received visits from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. But Frank's plan was far more intricate than they'd yet discovered. He'd spent 6 months creating a complex web of shell companies, all legally registered, all designed to ensnare Rita and Boyd in their own greed. Every forged signature they'd used, every false document they'd created, had been traced back to specific criminal acts that carried federal penalties. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he'd been expecting. Mr. Delacroix? This is Detective Sarah Chun with the city police. We have Rita Delacroix in custody. She's asking to speak with you. Frank smiled for the first time in weeks. What are the charges? Multiple counts of forgery, identity theft, and bank fraud. But we think there's more. She claims you set her up, but the evidence suggests she and her co-conspirator Boyd Hutchins orchestrated an elaborate fraud scheme using your identity. I'll be right there. The police station was familiar territory for Frank. He'd consulted with law enforcement agencies throughout his career, helping them understand criminal psychology and interrogation techniques. Now those skills were serving him personally. Rita sat in the interrogation room, looking haggard and desperate. When Frank entered with his attorney, her eyes blazed with fury. You bastard, she hissed. You planned this whole thing. Frank sat down calmly across from her. I signed the papers you gave me. I left quietly. What happens after that is simply the natural consequence of your choices. The loans you took out in my name, the shell companies, the fake accounts, you created all of that to frame me. Frank's attorney leaned forward. My client has never taken out unauthorized loans or created false accounts. The evidence shows that you and Mr. Hutchins forged his signature on multiple financial instruments. The companies you borrowed from are all legitimate businesses with proper legal standing. But the timing, Rita started. The timing of what? Frank asked. The timing of you deciding to commit fraud? The timing of you choosing to forge my signature? The timing of you planning to steal my assets through false documentation? Rita's face crumpled. Where are my children? What have you done to Trevor and Madison? They're adults, Frank said. They made their own choices. Trevor accepted money from offshore accounts to support your fraud. Madison helped create false financial records. They're facing their own legal consequences. They're your children. Frank's expression didn't change. No, my children wouldn't have betrayed me. My children wouldn't have helped you destroy me. The people calling themselves Trevor and Madison are strangers who happen to share my DNA. Rita began to cry, but Frank felt nothing. He'd buried his emotions for her months ago, when he'd first discovered her betrayal. "Frank, please," she whispered. "I made a mistake. I was scared about money, about the future. Boyd convinced me." "Stop." Frank's voice cut through her pleading. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to involve our children in your betrayal. You chose to commit crimes using my identity. Every consequence you're facing is the direct result of those choices." He stood to leave, but Rita grabbed his arm. "What happens now?" Frank looked down at her hand on his arm, and she quickly released it. "Now you face federal charges for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Boyd faces similar charges, plus charges in 3 other states for similar schemes he's run before. Trevor and Madison will likely face reduced charges if they cooperate with investigators." Rita's face went pale. "Other states? Did you really think you were Boyd's first victim? He's been running this same scheme for years, seducing wealthy women, manipulating them into financial fraud, then disappearing when things got complicated. You were just the latest mark." Frank turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Rita, the house you thought you were taking? The mortgage payments you've been making for the past 3 weeks? They've been going to one of my companies. Thank you for keeping up with the payments." As Frank left the police station, he felt the same calm satisfaction he'd experienced after successful military operations. Phase 1 was complete. Rita and Boyd were facing serious federal charges. Trevor and Madison were learning that actions have consequences. But Frank wasn't finished. There were still debts to be paid, and Frank Delacroix always collected what was owed to him. Chapter 6: The Reckoning Begins. The federal courthouse was a monument to justice, its marble columns and brass fixtures gleaming under the morning sun. Frank sat in the gallery, watching as Rita and Boyd were led in wearing orange jumpsuits, their hands shackled. 6 months had passed since his retirement ceremony. Rita had been denied bail after prosecutors argued she was a flight risk. Boyd had attempted to flee twice, once making it as far as Mexico before being extradited back. Trevor and Madison sat in the front row with their court-appointed attorneys, both having agreed to testify against their mother and Boyd in exchange for reduced sentences. They looked older, broken by the weight of their choices. Frank's attorney, Marcus Thornfield, leaned over and whispered, "The prosecutor says Rita wants to make a deal. She's willing to plead guilty to all charges if you'll speak on her behalf at sentencing." Frank's expression remained neutral. "No. She's claiming the affair was just a mistake, that Boyd manipulated her into the financial fraud. Irrelevant. Frank, she's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Boyd's looking at even more." Frank turned to look at his attorney. "Marcus, I spent 25 years defending this country from people who betrayed it. I've never shown mercy to traitors, and I'm not starting now." The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer Walsh, called her first witness, Frank himself. As Frank took the stand, he looked directly at Rita. She mouthed the word, "please," but he might as well have been looking at a stranger. "Mr. Delacroix," Prosecutor Walsh began, "can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendants?" "Rita Delacroix was my wife for 22 years. Boyd Hutchins was her business partner and, as I later discovered, her lover. Trevor and Madison Delacroix are my biological children." "Can you describe how you discovered the fraud scheme?" Frank's testimony was methodical and devastating. He detailed how he'd uncovered the affair, the forged documents, the false financial records. He explained how Rita and Boyd had used his military credentials to secure loans, forged his signature on multiple documents, and involved his children in their conspiracy. "The defendants believed they were manipulating me," Frank said. "In reality, they were revealing their true character. I simply documented their crimes and allowed the legal system to take its course." Rita's attorney, a nervous young man clearly out of his depth, tried to cross-examine Frank. "Mr. Delacroix, isn't it true that you orchestrated this entire scenario to frame my client?" Frank's stare could have frozen fire. "Your client forged my signature on loan documents. Your client created false financial records. Your client committed identity theft. These are crimes she chose to commit. I simply ensured there was evidence of her choices." But you set up the shell companies. I set up legitimate businesses through proper legal channels. The fact that your client chose to defraud those businesses doesn't make me responsible for her crimes. When Boyd's attorney tried a similar approach, Frank's response was even more devastating. Mr. Hutchins has committed similar fraud in Nevada, California, and Arizona, targeting wealthy women and manipulating them into financial crimes. He saw my wife as another mark. The fact that she willingly participated doesn't make her a victim. It makes her a co-conspirator. After 3 days of testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. On the count of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of identity theft, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. On the count of forgery, we find the defendant Rita Delacroix guilty. The pattern repeated for all charges against both Rita and Boyd. Trevor and Madison received suspended sentences and probation in exchange for their cooperation, but they were now convicted felons. At sentencing, Rita was given 18 years in federal prison. Boyd received 25 years, with additional time for his previous crimes in other states. As the bailiffs led them away, Rita looked back at Frank one last time. Her expression was pleading, desperate, seeking some sign of the man she'd once manipulated. Frank's face remained expressionless. As far as he was concerned, Rita Delacroix had died the day she betrayed him. The woman being led away in shackles was just a criminal paying for her crimes. Chapter 7. Settling all accounts. 2 years after the trial, Frank stood in the conference room of his private security firm, Delacroix Strategic Solutions. The company had grown rapidly, built on Frank's reputation and the contacts he'd made during his military career. His assistant, Lucy, knocked and entered. "Mr. Delacroix, Trevor is here to see you." Frank didn't look up from his files. "I'm not available." "Sir," he says it's about his mother. "She's been hospitalized." Frank finally looked up. "Send him in. 5 minutes." Trevor entered looking haggard and desperate. Prison had been hard on Rita, and the stress was showing on their son as well. "Dad, please," Trevor began. "Mom's had a heart attack. The doctors say the stress of prison is killing her. She needs medical care that the prison can't provide." Frank gestured to a chair, but remained standing. "Sit." Trevor sat, looking more like a supplicant than a son. "Dad, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but she's dying, and—" Trevor's face crumpled. "Please, Dad, I'm begging you. Use your influence. Get her transferred to a medical facility. Help her." Frank walked to the window overlooking the city. His company occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown high-rise, a symbol of how far he'd risen since his retirement. "Trevor, you made your choice 2 years ago. You chose to help your mother destroy me. You chose to accept money from fraudulent accounts. You chose to laugh at my expense. Those choices have consequences. But she's your wife." "No." Frank turned around, his voice cold as Arctic wind. "She was my wife. The woman in prison is a convicted felon who committed crimes against me. You want me to show mercy to someone who showed me none?" Trevor stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. What happened to forgiveness? What happened to family? Frank walked over to his desk and picked up a photograph. It was from his retirement ceremony, showing Rita, Trevor, and Madison smiling as they presented him with a gift they'd given him knowing they were about to destroy his life. "Family doesn't betray family," Frank said quietly. "Family doesn't laugh at family's destruction. Family doesn't commit crimes against family. The people in this photograph were never my family. They were actors playing roles, waiting for the right moment to strike." He set the photograph down. "Your mother chose her path. You chose yours. Now live with the consequences." Trevor's desperation turned to rage. "You're a monster. She loved you." Frank's expression didn't change. "She loved my money. She loved my status. She loved the life I provided. She never loved me. If she had, she wouldn't have betrayed me." "Fine," Trevor said, standing. "But what about Madison? She's struggling, Dad. She can't find work with a felony record. She's living in a studio apartment, working minimum wage jobs. She was just a kid when this happened." Frank walked back to his desk and sat down. Madison was 19 years old. an adult capable of making adult decisions. She chose to help you and your mother commit crimes. She chose to laugh at my destruction. She chose to help plan my financial ruin. He opened a file on his desk. According to my investigators, Madison is currently working 3 jobs to pay rent on a studio apartment in a questionable neighborhood. She's applied to 47 companies in the past 6 months and been rejected by all of them due to her criminal record. Trevor looked shocked. You've been monitoring her? I monitor all threats to my security. That includes people who have committed crimes against me, regardless of their DNA. Frank closed the file. Your 5 minutes are up. Trevor didn't move. Dad, please. I'm asking you to be human. Frank stood and walked to the door, opening it. I'm being human. I'm being the kind of human who doesn't forgive betrayal. I'm being the kind of human who holds traitors accountable for their actions. I'm being the kind of human who learned that mercy is weakness when dealing with people who would destroy you. As Trevor walked to the door, Frank spoke one final time. Trevor, you want forgiveness? You want mercy? You should have thought about that before you chose to betray me. Actions have consequences. You're living with yours now. After Trevor left, Frank returned to his desk. He'd built a new life from the ashes of his old one, and it was better than anything he'd had before. His company was thriving. His reputation was sterling. He was wealthy, powerful, and free from the people who'd tried to destroy him. Rita was dying in prison. Boyd was serving his sentence in maximum security. Trevor and Madison were struggling with the consequences of their choices. Frank felt no satisfaction in their suffering, but he felt no sympathy either. They made their choices. Now they were living with the results. Chapter 8. The Last Visit. The federal prison was a fortress of concrete and steel, surrounded by razor wire and guard towers. Frank had been here before, consulting on security matters for the government. He'd never imagined he'd be visiting as someone's husband. Rita lay in the prison hospital, connected to monitors and 4 lines. She looked 20 years older than her actual age, her hair gray and thin, her face gaunt. Prison had not been kind to her. She looked up as Frank entered, her eyes filling with tears. Frank, she whispered. You came. Frank pulled up a chair, but didn't sit close to the bed. The warden called. He said you were dying. Rita tried to smile. I guess I am. The doctors say my heart is failing. Too much stress, they say. Frank said nothing. Frank, I need to tell you something. About Boyd. About everything. I know everything I need to know. Rita shook her head weakly. No, you don't. Boyd, he showed me pictures. Pictures of you with other women during your deployments. He said you've been cheating on me for years. He said you never loved me, that I was just convenient. Frank's expression didn't change. There were no other women. I know that now. Rita said, tears streaming down her face. I know the pictures were fake. I know Boyd manipulated me. But at the time, I believed him. I thought you'd been lying to me our entire marriage. Frank stood up. It doesn't matter. It does matter. Rita's voice gained strength. I loved you, Frank. I really did love you. I was just scared. Scared that you'd leave me. Scared that I'd wasted my life on someone who didn't care about me. Frank walked to the window, looking out at the prison yard where inmates were exercising. Rita, even if Boyd showed you fake pictures, even if you believed I was cheating, that doesn't justify fraud. That doesn't justify forging my signature on loan documents. That doesn't justify involving our children in a scheme to destroy me. I know, Rita whispered. I know it was wrong. I know I hurt you in ways I can never fix. Frank turned back to face her. You didn't just hurt me, Rita. You betrayed me. You took our children, our own children, and turned them into accomplices in your crime. You made them laugh at my pain. You made them participants in my destruction. Rita closed her eyes. I was angry. I was hurt. I wanted to hurt you back. And you succeeded. Frank walked back to the chair, but didn't sit down. Rita, you want absolution. You want me to forgive you, so you can die in peace. But I'm not a priest, and this isn't a confessional. You made choices. Those choices destroyed our family, destroyed our children's futures, and nearly destroyed me. Frank, please. You want to know what hurts the most? Frank's voice was quiet but sharp as a blade. It's not the affair. It's not even the fraud. It's that you made our children into monsters. Trevor and Madison were good kids before you poisoned them against me. You turned them into criminals. You destroyed their lives along with yours. Rita was sobbing now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Frank stood by her bedside, looking down at the woman who'd shared his life for 22 years, the woman who'd given him 2 children, the woman who'd betrayed him more completely than any enemy he'd ever faced. Rita, I'm not here to forgive you. I'm not here to offer comfort. I'm here to tell you something important. She looked up at him hopefully. Your choices have consequences. Trevor is working night shifts in a warehouse, struggling to pay rent. Madison is cleaning offices at night because no one will hire a convicted felon during the day. They're both broken people, struggling with addiction and depression. Rita's face went pale. Addiction. Trevor's been arrested twice for possession. Madison's been in rehab 3 times. Your choices didn't just destroy you, they destroyed them too. Frank turned to leave. Frank, wait, Rita called out desperately. What about Mercy? What about the man I married? The man who believed in second chances? Frank paused at the door. That man died the day his wife and children served him divorce papers at his retirement ceremony. The man you're talking to now is someone different, someone harder, someone who learned that mercy is a luxury he can't afford. He opened the door, then looked back one final time. Goodbye, Rita. As Frank walked down the prison corridor, he heard her calling his name, but he didn't turn back. He'd said what he came to say. There was nothing left between them now but the consequences of her choices. Chapter 9. The Final Victory. Frank stood in his office 5 years after his retirement ceremony, looking out at the city sprawling below him. Delacroix Strategic Solutions now occupied an entire building, employing over 200 people and generating tens of millions in revenue annually. His assistant knocked and entered. Mr. Delacroix, there's been a development. Frank turned from the window. What kind of development? Rita Delacroix died last night. Heart failure. The prison warden called this morning. Frank nodded once. Thank you for letting me know. His assistant hesitated. Sir, there's more. Boyd Hutchins was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide. Frank felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, no sense of closure. Rita and Boyd were simply problems that had solved themselves. Also, his assistant continued, Trevor and Madison have both requested meetings with you. Separately, Frank walked to his desk and sat down. Schedule them for tomorrow. 15 minutes each. The next day, Madison entered his office first. She looked tired, worn down by years of struggling with the consequences of her choices. But there was something different about her, a kind of resigned maturity that hadn't been there before. Dad, she said quietly, sitting across from his desk. Madison, I heard about Mom. I wanted to thank you. Frank raised an eyebrow. Thank me? Madison nodded. For not helping her. For not showing mercy. For letting us face the consequences of what we did. Frank said nothing, waiting. I've been going to therapy, Madison continued. Real therapy, not court-ordered. I've been trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could laugh at their father's pain. How I could participate in destroying you. She took a deep breath. The therapist says I was never really your daughter. I was Mom's puppet. I did what she wanted because it was easier than thinking for myself. But that's not an excuse. I made choices. Bad choices. Frank's expression remained neutral. Yes, you did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Madison said. I'm not asking for help. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that you're not my father anymore, and I'm not your daughter. We're just 2 people who used to know each other. She stood up. I also wanted you to know that I'm doing okay. Not great, but okay. I'm clean. I have a job. I have a small apartment. I'm paying my own way for the first time in my life. Frank looked at her for a long moment. Good. Madison walked to the door, then paused. Dad? Frank? I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you for building all this, for not letting us destroy you, for being stronger than we were. After Madison left, Trevor entered. He looked worse than his sister, older, harder, with the look of a man who'd lost too many battles. She's dead, Trevor said without preamble. I know. Trevor sat down heavily. I hated you for a long time. Blamed you for everything. Blamed you for Mom's death, for Madison's problems, for my own failures. Frank waited. But I've had time to think. 5 years of thinking. And I realized something. Trevor looked up at Frank. You didn't destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. We made the choice to betray you. We made the choice to laugh at your pain. We made the choice to help Mom commit crimes. Trevor's voice cracked slightly. I've been jealous of you, you know that? Jealous that you survived what we did to you. Jealous that you built something better. Jealous that you moved on while we're still trapped by what we did. Frank's expression didn't change. Jealousy is a choice too. Trevor laughed bitterly. Yeah, it is. Just like everything else. He stood up. I'm not asking for anything, Frank. I'm not asking for forgiveness or help or a second chance. I'm just here to tell you that you won. Completely. Absolutely. Trevor walked toward the door, then turned back. You want to know the worst part? The part that really destroys me? It's not that we lost. It's that we deserved to lose. We deserved everything that happened to us. As Trevor left, Frank returned to his window. The city stretched out below him, full of possibilities and opportunities. He'd built a new life from nothing, surrounded himself with loyal employees and trusted associates. He was wealthy, successful, and free. Rita was dead. Boyd was dead. Trevor and Madison were broken remnants of their former selves, struggling to survive in a world that had no place for them. Frank had won, but victory tasted like ash. Not because he regretted his actions. He didn't. Not because he felt guilty. He felt nothing. Victory tasted like ash because winning had required becoming someone he'd never wanted to be. Someone who could look at his dying wife and feel nothing. Someone who could watch his children suffer and feel no compassion. But that was the price of betrayal. Rita and his children had forced him to become this person. They'd killed the man who might have shown mercy, who might have forgiven, who might have offered second chances. Frank Delacroix had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes survival requires becoming a monster. Sometimes winning means losing everything that made you human. As the sun set over the city, Frank stood alone in his office, surrounded by the empire he'd built from the ashes of his destroyed life. He was powerful, wealthy, and completely, utterly alone. But he was alive, and his enemies were not. In the end, that was victory enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Weight of Duty. Trevor Vaughn had always believed that saving lives was the noblest profession a man could pursue. 20 years in emergency medicine had taught him that life balanced on a razor's edge. One decision, one moment, could mean everything. But tonight, as he sutured a laceration on a college kid who'd gotten into a bar fight, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong at home. The ER at St. Catherine's Medical Center hummed with its usual Christmas Eve chaos. A kid with a broken arm from sledding. An elderly woman with chest pain. A construction worker who decided to hang Christmas lights after 6 beers. Trevor moved between patients with practiced efficiency, his tall frame and steady hands inspiring confidence. At 42, he still had the build of the college linebacker he'd once been, though gray now streaked his dark hair at the temples. Dr. Vaughn, we need you in trauma too, called Myra Maxwell, the charge nurse who'd worked alongside him for a decade. Trevor finished the last stitch and headed to the trauma bay, where a car accident victim was being wheeled in. As he worked, his mind drifted to his son, Christopher. The kid was 16 now, growing into a fine young man despite the tension that had been building in the Vaughn household for the past 2 years. The marriage to Paige had started well enough. They'd met 12 years ago when Trevor was establishing his career and Paige was working as a pharmaceutical sales rep. She was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from old money. The Myers family owned half the commercial real estate downtown. Her parents had never approved of Trevor. He came from working-class stock. His father, Robert Simmons, was a retired factory foreman. His mother, Lori, a former school cafeteria manager. They'd raised Trevor and his younger sister Jennifer in a modest ranch house on the east side of town. Different worlds, Paige's father had said at their engagement party, barely concealing his disdain. Trevor had proven himself, though. He'd put himself through medical school on scholarships and sheer determination, and by the time he married Paige, he was one of the most respected ER physicians in the city. But Christopher wasn't Paige's son. The boy was from Trevor's first marriage to Katie, a relationship that had ended amicably when they'd both realized they'd married too young. Katie had died in a car accident when Christopher was only 4, leaving Trevor to raise the boy alone until Paige came into their lives. At first, Paige had seemed accepting. She'd even been warm to Christopher. But after she and Trevor married, something shifted. The warmth became tolerance, then thinly veiled resentment. Especially after she failed to have children of her own. 3 miscarriages in 5 years had left her bitter and distant. Trevor glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. The family dinner at his in-laws' mansion had started at 6. Christopher had texted him earlier something about bringing his girlfriend Alicia to meet the family. Trevor had encouraged it. Alicia Kinney was a sweet girl from Christopher's school, smart and kind. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they were good people. The trauma stabilized. Trevor stepped away to check his phone. Nothing from Christopher. That was odd. The kid usually sent updates, especially on holidays. He tried calling. No answer. He texted, "How's dinner? Everything okay?" The message showed as delivered, but not read. A knot formed in Trevor's stomach. Across town, in the sprawling Myers estate on Ridgemont Hill, the aftermath of dinner hung heavy in the air. The table was being cleared by hired staff, crystal glasses still half full of expensive wine. Paige Vaughn sat in the drawing room with her parents, Harold and Viola Myers, a satisfied smile on her face. "I think that went well," Paige said, swirling her wine. Harold Myers, a silver-haired man of 65 who'd built his fortune through ruthless business practices, nodded approvingly. The boy needed to learn his place. Bringing that girl to a family dinner without permission was disrespectful. Viola, draped in designer everything, added, "We've been too tolerant of Trevor's little mistakes. That child isn't even our blood, and now he thinks he can parade some nobody through our home." What they didn't know was that Trevor's parents, Robert and Lori Simmons, had been invited to the dinner as well. The elderly couple had arrived on time, expecting a pleasant family gathering. Instead, they'd witnessed something that shocked them to their core. Robert Simmons, at 70, still had the bearing of a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life. He sat now in his modest living room, his weathered face creased with anger. His wife Lori paced, her hands trembling. "We should call Trevor," Lori said. "He needs to know what they did." "He's working a double shift," Robert replied, his voice low and controlled. "He's saving lives. We can't distract him with this. Not yet." "But Bobby—" "Tomorrow," Robert said firmly. "We tell him tomorrow, and then we see what kind of man our son really is." Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Trevor's double shift ended at 8 a.m. on Christmas morning. He was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, but he headed straight home to the large colonial in Westbrook Heights that Paige had insisted they buy. It was too big, too expensive, but it was in the right neighborhood close to her parents. The house was quiet when he entered. Too quiet. Christopher's car wasn't in the driveway. Trevor found Paige in the kitchen, perfectly dressed despite the early hour, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. "Merry Christmas," Trevor said, setting down his keys. "Where's Chris?" Paige didn't look up. "Probably sulking somewhere." "What does that mean?" She sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "He embarrassed us last night at my parents' house. Showed up with that girl without asking if it was appropriate." Trevor felt ice in his veins. "Alicia? I told him he could bring her. I thought it would be nice for them to." "Well, you thought wrong," Paige snapped. "It was a family dinner. She's not family. She's Christopher's girlfriend. Where are they now?" "How should I know?" "He left." Trevor pulled out his phone and called his son. It went straight to voicemail. He called again. Same result. Then he noticed a text from his mother, sent at 7 a.m. "Please come to the house when you can. Important." 20 minutes later, Trevor pulled up to his parents' small ranch. His father was waiting at the door, and the look on Robert Simmons's face told Trevor everything he needed to know. This was bad. Inside, his mother had coffee ready, but Trevor could see she'd been crying. His younger sister Jennifer was there too, her expression furious. "What happened?" Trevor demanded. Robert gestured to the couch. "Sit down, son." What they told him made Trevor's blood boil. Christopher had arrived at the Myers mansion at 6 p.m. with Alicia, both dressed nicely, excited to spend Christmas Eve with family. The dinner table had been set for 12. Trevor's parents, Paige's brother Bradley, and his wife Krista, and a few family friends. When Christopher and Alicia arrived, Viola Myers had taken one look at the girl and declared, "There's no room for her at the table." The table that seated 12, with only 10 people expected. Christopher had protested. Paige had backed her mother. Then Harold Myers had delivered the killing blow. "This is a family dinner for people who matter. Your little friend doesn't qualify. If you want to stay, send her home." Robert Simmons had stood up to object, but Christopher had already made his decision. "Then I don't qualify either," the 16-year-old had said. He'd taken Alicia's hand and walked out, driving her home before returning to the empty house in Westbrook Heights to spend Christmas alone. Paige had stayed at the mansion. She hadn't even texted her stepson to check on him. Trevor sat in stunned silence as his father finished the story. His mother was crying again. Jennifer looked ready to commit murder. "They humiliated him," Jennifer said. "They humiliated a 16-year-old kid on Christmas because his girlfriend isn't rich enough for them." Trevor's hands were steady, but his mind was racing. He thought of all the times he'd overlooked Paige's coldness toward Christopher. The subtle digs. The way she corrected the boy's manners, but never with warmth. The way she'd stopped attending his baseball games. He'd told himself it was complicated, that step-families were hard, that Paige was dealing with her own pain from the miscarriages. But this was deliberate cruelty. "Where's Christopher now?" Trevor asked quietly. "He called me this morning," Roberts said. "He's at Bobby Hunter's house." His teammates' family took him in when he told them what happened. Bobby Hunter was Christopher's best friend, a good kid whose parents Fernando and Celia were salt-of-the-earth people. Of course, they'd taken him in. Trevor stood. "Thank you for telling me." "What are you going to do?" his mother asked. Trevor looked at his parents, these people who'd worked themselves to the bone to give him opportunities, who'd helped raise Christopher while Trevor built his career, who'd never once made anyone feel less than welcome in their home. "I'm going to fix this," he said simply. Chapter 3, The Letter. Trevor drove to the Hunter residence, a comfortable home in a middle-class neighborhood. Fernando Hunter, a construction manager, answered the door and immediately pulled Trevor into a firm handshake. "Christopher's a good kid," Fernando said. "What they did to him, to that sweet girl, it wasn't right. Document." Trevor found his son in the basement, playing video games with Bobby. Christopher looked up when Trevor entered, and the hurt in the boy's eyes nearly broke him. "Dad," Christopher said, setting down the controller. "I'm sorry, I should have." "You have nothing to apologize for," Trevor cut him off. He sat beside his son. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening in our own house." Christopher's composure cracked. "She hates me. Paige hates me. And her parents. Dad, they looked at Alicia like she was garbage. Like we were garbage. Grandpa and Grandma saw everything." Trevor pulled his son into a hug. "Listen to me. What happened wasn't about you or Alicia. It was about small people trying to feel big by making others feel small. And it's going to stop." "What do you mean?" "I mean things are going to change. But I need you to trust me and be patient." "Can you do that?" Christopher nodded, though confusion clouded his features. Trevor spent an hour with the Hunters, thanking them for their kindness and catching up on Christopher's well-being. Then he returned home to Westbrook Heights. Paige was in the living room when he entered, now dressed in designer loungewear, watching a Christmas movie as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," Trevor said. She paused the TV. "If this is about last night." "It is." "Then you need to understand that Christopher overstepped. Stop." Trevor's voice was calm, but carried an edge that made Paige actually look at him. "I want you to listen very carefully. What you and your family did to Christopher and Alicia was cruel. Unforgivable, actually." Paige stood indignant. "My parents have every right to decide who sits at their table. and I have every right to decide who I spend my life with. Trevor watched her face carefully. I've been blind, Paige. For 2 years, I've watched you pull away from Christopher. I told myself you were hurting, that you needed time, that I should be understanding about the miscarriages. But this isn't about that, is it? This is about you deciding that my son, a good kid who's never done anything but try to earn your approval, isn't good enough for your family standards. That's not. I'm not finished. Trevor's voice remained steady, clinical, almost the same tone he used when delivering bad news to families in the ER. I stayed in this marriage because I believed in us. But I won't sacrifice my son for a woman who can't even pretend to care about him. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to Christopher. A real apology. And you're going to mean it. Or what? Paige's eyes flashed with anger and something else. Fear, maybe, that her comfortable life was threatened. Or we're done. The ultimatum hung in the air. Paige stared at him, likely calculating. Trevor knew her well enough to know she was weighing options, considering what a divorce would mean. She'd signed a prenup, a tight one her father had insisted on. If she left, she'd get something, but not the lifestyle she'd grown accustomed to. And a divorce would be a scandal in her social circle. This is ridiculous, she finally said. You're going to throw away our marriage over one dinner? No, Trevor replied. I'm going to end our marriage because of who you've become. Or maybe who you always were. And I was too in love to see it. He walked upstairs to the master bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and began packing. Paige followed, her mask slipping. You can't leave me, she hissed. Do you know what people will say? I don't care what people say. I care about my son. He's not even, she stopped herself, but too late. Not even what? Trevor turned to face her. Not even yours? I know that. He's mine, and he's worth 10 of you and your whole family combined. Trevor finished packing and walked out. He didn't look back. He spent Christmas night at his parents' house, in his childhood bedroom. His mother made him dinner, and his father sat with him, offering the quiet support that had carried Trevor through medical school, through Katie's death, through everything. I'm proud of you, Robert said simply. The next morning, Boxing Day, Trevor woke early and did something he'd been planning since leaving the house. He called Gregory Norton, the best divorce attorney in the city, a man he'd saved in the ER 3 years ago after a heart attack. Greg had told him, Doc, you ever need anything, you call me. Trevor was calling. 2 hours later, he met with Greg in the attorney's downtown office. Trevor laid out everything. The prenup, the assets, the incident with Christopher. Greg listened, taking notes, his sharp mind already working angles. The prenup is solid, Greg said. She gets a settlement, but not much. The house is in both names, but you can buy her out. The real issue is going to be her family. The Myers don't like to lose. I'm not worried about what they like, Trevor said. Greg smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Good, because I'm going to make sure this divorce is airtight. She won't get a penny more than the prenup specifies, and she won't get another moment of your time. There's one more thing, Trevor said. I want you to look into the Myers family business. Harold Myers, specifically. I know his type. Men who cut corners, who think rules don't apply to them. Find out what he's hiding. Greg's smile widened. Now we're talking. You want leverage. I want insurance, Trevor corrected. I want to make sure they never come after Christopher again. Or me. Or anyone in my family. Consider it done. Trevor had the divorce papers drawn up that afternoon. He drove back to Westbrook Heights, let himself into the house, and found Paige exactly where he'd left her, in the living room, though now she was on the phone with someone, probably her mother, based on the tone. She hung up when she saw him. Trevor, we need to talk. I've been thinking. He handed her the envelope. What's this? Divorce papers. You can have your attorney review them, but they're non-negotiable. You get what the prenup stipulates. I get the practice, my retirement accounts, and I'll buy you out of the house. You have 72 hours to vacate. Paige's face went white, then red. You can't. I already did. Trevor was calm, almost eerily so. Sign them or don't. Either way, this marriage is over. He left her standing there, envelope in hand, and walked out of the house for the last time. But as he drove away, he received a text from an unknown number. You're going to regret this. The Myers family doesn't forget. Trevor stared at the message. Then he forwarded it to Greg Norton with a single word: evidence. The war had begun. Chapter 4, Reconnaissance. The week after Christmas passed in a blur of legal maneuvering and cold precision. Paige had hired her own attorney, a shark named Armando Kirk who'd built his reputation destroying husbands in divorce court. Trevor wasn't intimidated. He had truth, and he had Greg Norton. What Trevor also had was time to think. Years of emergency medicine had taught him to stay calm under pressure, to see patterns others missed, to make decisions when lives hung in the balance. This situation wasn't that different. He just needed to diagnose the problem and treat it at the root. The problem wasn't just Paige. It was her entire family, a dynasty built on looking down at people like Trevor and his son. They'd spent 12 years tolerating him because he was useful, a respected doctor made for good optics at their charity galas. But they'd never truly accepted him, and they'd certainly never accepted Christopher. Now that he'd filed for divorce, the Myers would retaliate. Trevor knew that. The threatening text was just the beginning. He needed to know everything about them. Greg Norton called on New Year's Eve with his first report. Trevor was at his parents' house, watching Christopher and Bobby play basketball in the driveway, when his phone rang. "You were right to be suspicious," Greg said without preamble. "Harold Myers isn't just a successful businessman. He's a predator. I've found 3 separate lawsuits that were settled quietly out of court. 2 from former business partners claiming fraud, 1 from a tenant who claimed Myers used illegal tactics to force her out of a rent-controlled building. Settlements mean no public record," Trevor said. "Exactly. He pays to make problems disappear. But here's the interesting part. I found a connection to a city councilman, Edward Flynn. Myers has been funneling money to Flynn's campaigns for years, and in return, Flynn pushes through zoning changes that benefit Myers' properties. It's not quite bribery, but it's close." "How close?" "Close enough that if the right journalists got interested, it could become a very big problem for both of them." Trevor watched Christopher make a 3-pointer, the kid's face lit with genuine joy for the first time in days. "What else?" "The son, Bradley Myers. He's the VP of operations for the family company. Smart guy, actually MBA from Wharton. But he's got a gambling problem. Underground poker games, sports betting. I've got a source who says he's into a loan shark for 6 figures. This was interesting. Bradley had always been polite to Trevor, distant but not openly hostile like his parents or Paige. A gambling debt meant vulnerability. It meant leverage. "And Paige?" Trevor asked. "Paige is complicated. She doesn't work for the family company, hasn't for years. But she's on the board of 3 different charities, all funded by Myers' money. I'm looking into those now, seeing if there are any irregularities." "Keep digging," Trevor said. "I need to know everything." After hanging up, Trevor made another call, this one to an old friend from medical school. Salvatore Stevens had gone into forensic pathology instead of clinical medicine, but he'd maintained connections throughout the medical and legal communities. More importantly, Sal was married to a woman named Marcella who worked as an investigative journalist for the city's major newspaper. "Trevor Vaughn," Sal's voice boomed through the phone. "I heard you finally kicked that ice queen to the curb. Good for you. Word travels fast. In our circles? Always. What do you need?" Trevor explained the situation, carefully editing out anything that might sound like he was asking for illegal help. He simply wondered if Marcella might be interested in a story about questionable business practices among the city's elite. "Let me talk to her," Sal said. "But Trevor, be careful. The Myers family has a long reach." "So do I," Trevor replied. That night, as fireworks exploded over the city to welcome the new year, Trevor sat in his childhood bedroom and made a list. Not of what he wanted to do to the Myers. Revenge for its own sake was hollow. No, this was a list of goals. Protect Christopher from any further harm. Ensure the divorce was final and clean. Make certain the Myers could never threaten his family again. Expose the rot at the heart of their empire. It was the 4th goal that would require the most care. Trevor wasn't interested in personal vendetta, but if the Myers were hurting others the way they'd hurt Christopher, that needed to stop. His phone buzzed. A text from Christopher. "Happy New Year, Dad. Love you." Trevor smiled and responded, "Love you too, son. This year is going to be better. I promise." Chapter 5. The trap is set. January brought cold winds and colder revelations. Greg Norton's investigation into the Myers family bore fruit faster than Trevor had anticipated. It turned out that when you built an empire on intimidation and corner-cutting, you left a trail of angry people eager to talk. Trevor met with Greg in mid-January at a quiet restaurant on the edge of town. The attorney slid a folder across the table. "This is dynamite," Greg said. "Harold Myers has been running a scheme for the past 5 years. He buys up properties in developing neighborhoods, then uses his political connections to get them rezoned. The property values skyrocket, and he sells at massive profits. Legal on the surface, but the way he acquires the properties isn't." "Explain," Trevor said, opening the folder. "He uses intimidation. His company has been filing frivolous lawsuits against property owners who won't sell, dragging them through legal proceedings until they can't afford to fight anymore. He's also been using code enforcement, calling in violations, real or imagined, forcing owners to make expensive repairs. Those who can't afford it lose their properties at auction. Guess who buys them? Myers. Every time. I've found 9 families who lost their homes or businesses this way in the past 3 years. 9 families, Trevor. Most of them couldn't afford lawyers to fight back." Trevor studied the documents. Names, addresses, stories of lives upended. An elderly couple who'd owned a corner store for 40 years. A young family with a starter home. A veteran who'd been trying to renovate a building into a community center. "This is more than business," Trevor said quietly. "This is predatory. It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective." Paige was involved. Trevor looked up sharply. Greg pulled out more documents. "She sits on the board of New Horizons Community Development, one of the family's charitable foundations. On paper, it's supposed to help low-income families with housing. In reality, it's been used to identify properties for Myers to target." Paige personally visited 3 of the families, supposedly to offer assistance. 2 weeks later, they started getting code violations and lawsuits. Trevor felt something cold settle in his chest. He'd known Paige was cold, but this was active participation in ruining lives. "Can we prove her involvement?" "Her signature is on the foundation documents. She attended the board meetings. She visited the families. We can prove she knew what was happening. Whether a prosecutor could prove criminal intent is another question, but for a civil case, absolutely." "What about Bradley's gambling debts?" Greg smiled grimly. "That's where things get interesting. Bradley isn't just in debt. He's been embezzling from the family company to pay off his bookies. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there. But it's escalated. I'm talking about $200,000 over the past 18 months. Does Harold know? I don't think so. Bradley's been clever about hiding it in the accounting. But here's where it gets really good. The man Bradley owes money to is Roy Simmons. No relation to you, different Simmons. Roy runs an underground casino operation, and he doesn't like being owed money. He's been pressuring Bradley, and Bradley's desperate." Trevor processed this information. An idea was forming, something that would require perfect timing and careful execution. "I need to meet with Bradley," Trevor said. Greg raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because he's not like his parents or his sister. He's weak, desperate, and in over his head. That makes him useful. What are you planning?" Trevor smiled, and it wasn't pleasant. "I'm going to give Bradley a way out. And in return, he's going to give me everything I need to bring down his father." Setting up the meeting with Bradley Myers took finesse. Trevor couldn't approach him directly. That would raise suspicions. Instead, he had Greg Norton reach out through a mutual business contact, suggesting that Bradley might benefit from talking to Trevor about family business matters. They met at a golf course clubhouse on a gray January afternoon. Bradley arrived looking haggard, his expensive suit hanging a bit looser than it should, dark circles under his eyes. At 38, he looked 10 years older. "Trevor," Bradley said, sitting down across from him in a private room. "I wasn't expecting, given the situation with you and Paige." "This isn't about Paige," Trevor said calmly. "This is about you. More specifically, about your problem with Roy Simmons." The blood drained from Bradley's face. "I don't know what you are." "Bradley." Trevor's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm a doctor. I recognize someone in crisis. You're in over your head. Way over. And the people you owe money to aren't going to wait forever. Bradley's composure cracked. His hands shook as he reached for the water glass in front of him. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that I can help you. Why would you help me? My family has. Your father and mother are terrible people. Your sister is following in their footsteps. But you, Trevor leaned forward. You're not like them. You're just a guy who made some bad choices and doesn't know how to get out. Bradley looked like he might cry. I'm 2 weeks away from Roy's guys paying me a visit that won't be pleasant. My father will find out about the money I took from the company. When he does, he'll destroy me. I'm ruined either way. Not if you help me. Help you do what? Trevor laid it out simply. Bradley would provide documentation of everything. His father's business practices, the property schemes, Paige's involvement with the foundation, all of it. In return, Trevor would pay off Bradley's gambling debts and ensure he had a way out of the family business with enough money to start over somewhere else. That's $200,000, Bradley said weakly, plus another 100 for Roy's interest. Why would you do that? Because I want your father to face consequences for what he's done. Not just to me and my son, but to all the families he's destroyed. And I want to make sure he never has the power to do it again. Bradley stared at him. You want me to betray my own father. I want you to do the right thing. Maybe for the first time in your life. For a long moment, Bradley said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded. Everything. I'll give you everything. But Trevor, my father's going to know it came from me. When this is over, I'll have no family left. Then you'll build a new one, Trevor said. A better one. One that isn't built on hurting people. They shook hands. The deal was made. Chapter 6. Dominoes Fall. February arrived with a vengeance, bringing freezing rain and the first pieces of Trevor's plan clicking into place. Bradley Myers proved true to his word, delivering boxes of documents that painted a damning picture of the Myers family empire. Bank records, property transactions, board meeting minutes from a New Horizons Foundation, internal emails discussing which properties to target. It was all there. Greg Norton worked with Marcella Stevens, Sal's journalist wife, to verify everything. Marcella was a bulldog, following every lead, confirming every detail. She'd been investigating Harold Myers before, but could never quite build a case. Now, with Bradley's insider information, she had everything she needed. This is Pulitzer-level stuff, Marcella told Trevor when they met at a coffee shop in early February. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, with short gray hair and the intensity of someone who lived for the truth. Harold Myers has been systematically destroying working-class families for profit, and he's been using a charity, a tax-exempt charity, to do it. This is going to explode. When are you publishing? Trevor asked. 2 weeks. I need to get statements from all the families affected, give Myers a chance to respond, and get my editors on board. But it's happening. This is really happening. Meanwhile, Trevor quietly paid off Bradley's debts. $300,000 was a lot of money, nearly depleting his savings, but it was worth it. He had Greg set up the payment through untraceable channels. Roy Simmons didn't need to know where the money came from, only that his debt was paid. Bradley, true to his arrangement, resigned from the family company, citing personal health reasons. Harold was furious, but didn't suspect anything. Yet, the divorce proceedings were moving forward as well. Paige had fought the prenup, claiming it was signed under duress, but Greg had been thorough. The agreement held. She would get a settlement of $150,000 and walk away. The house would be sold, with Trevor buying her out at market value. But Paige wasn't going quietly. In early February, she filed for spousal support, claiming she'd sacrificed her career for the marriage. It was absurd. She'd never had much of a career, but it was meant to be punitive, to drag things out. Let her try, Greg said. We'll bury her in discovery. Every email, every board meeting, every connection to her father's schemes. By the time we're done, she'll be begging to take the prenup settlement. Then came the first domino. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, ironically, the city newspaper ran Marcella Stevens' expose. The headline read, Myers' Empire Built on Ruin. How one family used charity as cover for predatory business practices. The article was devastating. It named names, told stories, showed documents. It detailed how Harold Myers had destroyed 9 families, how Page had been complicit through the foundation, how City Councilman Edward Flynn had enabled it all through favorable zoning decisions. The response was immediate. The district attorney announced an investigation. The IRS began looking into the New Horizons Foundation. Flynn held a press conference denying everything, but reporters had already found evidence of the campaign contributions. Harold Myers went into damage control, hiring a crisis PR firm. But the story had legs. Other families came forward telling similar tales. The local TV news picked it up. National outlets started calling. And through it all, no one suspected Bradley's involvement. He'd done such a thorough job of appearing to be just another Myers family member that when he quietly moved to Seattle a week after the story broke, citing a desire for a fresh start, no one thought twice about it. Trevor watched it unfold with grim satisfaction. But he wasn't done. On February 20th, he received a call from Page's attorney, Armando Kirk. "My client would like to accept the prenup settlement," Kirk said, his voice tight, "and withdraw the spousal support claim." "Why the change of heart?" Trevor asked, though he knew. Given the current situation with her family, Mrs. Vaughn feels it's best to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. Translation: Page was trying to distance herself from the scandal. Taking the settlement and disappearing was her best option. "Tell your client she has a deal," Trevor said. "The papers can be signed this week." 3 days later, on a cold Thursday morning, Trevor and Page met in Greg Norton's office to sign the final divorce decree. They didn't speak. Page looked diminished, her usual polish replaced with barely concealed panic. The scandal had cost her 3 charities had removed her from their boards, and her social circle was icing her out. She signed the papers with shaking hands and left without a word. Trevor felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just relief that it was over. "You did it," Greg said after she'd gone. "Clean break, no alimony, and she's out of your life." "Part of it," Trevor corrected. "But there's still one more thing." Greg raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I want to help the families Myers destroyed. Set up a fund, legal assistance, whatever they need to get back on their feet. Anonymously. That's going to cost you." "I don't care. Some things are worth more than money." Greg smiled. "You're a good man, Trevor Vaughn. I'm just trying to do what's right." Chapter 7. Consequences. March came in like a lion, and so did the consequences for the Myers family. Harold Myers was indicted on 12 counts of fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. The evidence Bradley had provided, combined with Marcella's investigation and testimony from victims, built an airtight case. Viola Myers filed for divorce, taking half the remaining fortune that hadn't been seized by the IRS. Apparently, she had limits to what she'd tolerate, and federal prison time was one of them. Edward Flynn resigned from the city council and cut a deal with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Myers in exchange for reduced charges. His political career was over, but he'd avoid prison. Page disappeared from public life entirely, moving to her mother's vacation home in the Carolinas. The divorce was final, the money transferred, and Trevor never heard from her again. But the real satisfaction came in April, when Trevor attended a community meeting in one of the neighborhoods Myers had targeted. The families who'd lost their homes had banded together, forming a nonprofit to fight predatory landlords and protect their neighbors. With the anonymous fund Trevor had established, $500,000 of his own money, managed through a trust, they had resources to hire lawyers, file class action suits, and buy back some of the properties Myers had stolen. Mrs. Candy Brennan, a widow who'd lost her home of 30 years to Myers' schemes, spoke at the meeting. She was in her 70s, a small woman with steel in her spine. "We lost everything," she said, "but we're fighting back, and we're winning. Because someone out there, someone who didn't have to care, gave us the means to fight. Whoever you are, thank you." Trevor sat in the back of the room, unnoticed. Christopher was beside him. The boy had insisted on coming, wanting to understand what his father had been working toward. "You did this," Christopher whispered. "We did this," Trevor corrected. "What they did to you, what they tried to do to Alicia, it wasn't isolated. People like the Myers don't just hurt one person. They hurt everyone they can. Someone had to stop them." Christopher looked at his father with something like awe. "You're like a superhero," Trevor laughed softly. No, I'm just a doctor who remembered that healing doesn't always happen in the ER. Sometimes it happens in courtrooms and community centers. After the meeting, Mrs. Brennan approached them. She'd seen Trevor at the divorce proceedings, recognized him from the photos in the paper. Dr. Vaughn, she said, I know what you did. I know the fund came from you. Trevor started to deny it, but she held up a hand. I won't tell anyone, but I wanted to thank you personally. My home. My husband bought that house 40 years ago. Raised our children there. Myers took it, but now with the lawsuit and the fund, we might get it back. You will get it back, Trevor said firmly. That's a promise. She hugged him, this tiny woman who'd lost everything and was still fighting. Christopher watched, understanding something important about the kind of man his father was. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Harold Myers' trial was set for June, but Trevor wasn't waiting for the legal system to deliver the final blow. He'd been planning something more personal, more direct. In late May, he received word that Harold, out on bail, was still trying to salvage his business empire. The man was shameless, using every connection he had left to influence the trial, to intimidate witnesses. He'd even tried to reach out to Bradley in Seattle, but his son had changed his number and refused all contact. Trevor decided it was time for a face-to-face meeting. He arranged it through Greg Norton, who set up a conference under the guise of settlement negotiations for potential civil suits. Harold agreed, probably thinking he could intimidate Trevor or buy him off. They met in a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown hotel. Harold arrived with 2 attorneys, looking haggard but still carrying himself with arrogance. At 65, facing federal prison, he still thought he was untouchable. Trevor came alone. Dr. Vaughn, Harold said with false warmth. I'm glad we could finally talk man to man. This whole situation has been unfortunate, but I'm sure we can reach an understanding. There's no understanding to reach, Trevor said, sitting down across from him. I'm not here to negotiate. Harold's smile faded. Then why are you here? To tell you exactly what's going to happen. You're going to prison, Harold. The evidence against you is overwhelming. Your lawyers know it, the prosecutors know it, and deep down, you know it. That remains to be seen, Harold blustered. I have resources, connections. You had resources. You had connections. Past tense. Edward Flynn turned on you. Your business partners are distancing themselves. Your wife divorced you. Your son, your own son, gave me every piece of evidence I needed to destroy you. Harold's face went purple. Bradley? That little what? The son you ignored until you needed him to manage your criminal enterprise? The one you treated like a tool instead of person? Trevor leaned forward. Bradley's in Seattle now, starting a new life. A legitimate life. And he's never coming back. I'll find him. You'll do nothing, Trevor interrupted, his voice cold. Because you have no power anymore. No money, no influence, nothing. You're just a bitter old man facing the consequences of decades of cruelty. Harold's attorneys shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a young woman named Carrie Donnelly, looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Why? Harold demanded. Why did you do this? Because of one dinner? Because your son's feelings got hurt? No, Trevor said quietly. I did this because you needed to be stopped. Because you've spent your entire life hurting people weaker than you, taking from those who couldn't fight back, and hiding behind wealth and respectability. I did this because my son and Alicia and my parents and 9 families you destroyed deserve justice. Justice? Harold laughed bitterly. This isn't justice. This is revenge. Maybe, Trevor acknowledged. But it's also karma. You taught me something important, Harold. You taught me that sometimes the system fails. Sometimes bad people get away with terrible things. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone with the means and the will can make things right. He stood to leave. Wait, Harold said. For the first time, Trevor heard something other than arrogance in his voice. Desperation. What do you want? Money? I can still access some accounts overseas. Name your price. Trevor looked down at him. I don't want anything from you. I already have everything I need. My son's respect, my integrity, and the satisfaction of knowing that you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell thinking about all the lives you destroyed. He walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Harold, when you're in prison, thinking about how you got there, remember this. It started because you couldn't show basic human decency to a 16-year-old kid and his girlfriend on Christmas. That's your legacy. That's what brought you down. Trevor left Harold Myers sitting in that conference room, a broken man finally facing the weight of his sins. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. Summer brought warmth and healing. Harold Myers was convicted on all counts in June and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He'd be 80 before he saw freedom again, if he lived that long. The civil suits from the families he destroyed were settled with what remained of his assets. Mrs. Brennan got her house back. The veteran got his building. The young family got compensated enough to buy a new home. Trevor sold a house in Westbrook Heights and bought a smaller, warmer place in his old neighborhood, closer to his parents. Christopher's room was bigger than before, and there was a guest room for when Alicia visited, which was often. The girl had become a fixture in their lives, sweet and smart and good for Christopher. In August, Robert and Lori Simmons hosted a family barbecue. The whole clan was there. Trevor's sister Jennifer and her family, the Hunters, the Kinneys, Alicia's parents, even Sal Stevens and Marcella. Christopher and Alicia were inseparable, sitting close together, whispering and laughing. Bobby Hunter was there too, joking with them. The kids were happy, unburdened by the drama of the past months. Robert Simmons pulled Trevor aside while burgers sizzled on the grill. You did good, son, the old man said. I'm proud of you, not just for what you did to Myers, but for how you did it. You didn't lose yourself in anger. You stayed who you are. I learned from the best, Trevor replied, watching his father flip burgers with the same steady hands that had once assembled factory parts, that had taught Trevor how to change a tire, how to be a man. What's next for you? Robert asked. Trevor thought about it. The divorce was final. The Myers were destroyed. The families were healing. Christopher was thriving. I'm going back to basics, he said. Medicine, being a father, living a simple, good life. Sounds perfect. That night, as the sun set and the family gathered around a fire pit, Christopher stood up to make a toast. At 17 now, his birthday had been in July. He was growing into a fine young man. I want to thank everyone for being here, Christopher said, holding up his soda can. Especially my dad. Last Christmas, some people tried to make me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't belong. But Dad showed me something important. It's not about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about how you treat people. It's about standing up for what's right. He looked at Trevor, eyes shining. Dad, you didn't just stand up for me. You stood up for everyone the Myers family ever hurt. You proved that one person can make a difference. That's the kind of man I want to be. Trevor felt his throat tighten with emotion. To Trevor, someone shouted, and the whole group raised their drinks. To family, Trevor corrected, looking around at these people, blood relatives and chosen family alike. To love and loyalty and second chances. They drank to that. Later, after most people had gone home, Trevor sat on his porch with Christopher, watching fireflies dance in the summer night. Dad, Christopher said quietly, do you ever regret it? The divorce, the trial, all of it? Never, Trevor said without hesitation. The only thing I regret is not seeing the truth sooner. But everything that happened led us here. And here's pretty good, don't you think? Christopher smiled. Yeah, it really is. From inside the house, Trevor's phone buzzed. A text from Greg Norton. Final settlement money transferred to the community fund. $1.2 million from Myers' assets. Those families are set for life. Trevor smiled and pocketed the phone. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't always swift. But it was sweet when it finally arrived. What are you thinking about? Christopher asked. Just that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all, Trevor said. It's building something better from the ashes of what was destroyed. Deep, Dad. I have my moments. They sat in comfortable silence, father and son, watching the stars come out. Somewhere across town, Harold Myers sat in a cell, contemplating his fall from grace. Paige was probably in the Carolinas, trying to reinvent herself. Bradley was in Seattle, finally building an honest life.